There are a lot of functions available already within MATLAB, but regardless of whether or not you're using the MATLAB functions that are built in or you're using the functions you write yourself, they're all used the same. So the way we use a function is called a function call. So calling means to use the function. Essentially, what we're going to do is we're going to call the function in an expression. It's going to execute the code inside the function using the values that we send it. These are called input arguments. And then assigns the output of the function to the output arguments. So this function here is called function name. It takes in, we'll pretend that's not there. It takes in 2 arguments. So we need to send it 2 pieces of information. And then it returns, pretend that's not there, it returns 2 pieces of information. So when we use this function, our function call is essentially going to look just like this. We're going to assign the output, the calculations of the function, to variables. Then we have our equal sign, and over here is where we're calling the function. We're saying execute the code inside of this function using this data and this data. So a function call can be performed from the command window, from a script file, from another function file. Really, it can be used anywhere, as long as the function appears in your current folder. So if the function does not show up in your current folder, it cannot be used. But if it does, you can use it in a script file, in a function file, in the command window, wherever you write code. So let's look at what this looks like. So here's the function that I wrote in the last video. I have miles, kilometers, car distance, mpg, gallons. So right now, when I write a function, these are called output parameters, forgot the word for a minute, and these are input parameters. I'm going to use this function, I'm going to call it inside of my command window. And essentially what I'm going to do is I'm just going to type the name of my function, car distance, open close parentheses. I know this function takes 2 pieces of information. It takes in whatever my miles per gallon is going to be and whatever gallon is. So let's say my miles per gallon is 34. And then the gallons I have, it's 10-gallon tank. So that means I'm going to execute the code inside of this function. It's going to execute these 3 lines of code here. It's going to use a value of 34 for mpg, and it's going to use a value of 10 for gallons. Now I need to store the calculations. Remember, it's calculating miles and kilometers inside of here. So I need to store whatever those final calculations are going to be in some of my own variables. So I'm going to say whatever my car is, maybe it's a Civic, miles, and it takes 2 outputs. So the first one, whatever miles is calculated as, is going to be stored in Civic M, and whatever kilometers is going to be calculated as is going to be stored in Civic KM. So there we go, that's my function call. Note, it looks very similar to your function definition line minus the word function. And that's totally true. Use that as a template. There's 2 outputs. I have 2 variables. This first one is going to store whatever miles is calculated as. This second one is going to store whatever kilometers is calculated as. Then equals the name of my function. And then it takes 2 inputs. 34 is going to be used for miles per gallon. 10 is going to be used for gallon. So now when I press enter, this line of code is executed, which means it goes inside of my function, does these calculations, and returns the result. And then I can do it with a different one. Let's say I have a Odyssey. How do you spell Odyssey? Which is a minivan, my Honda. And let's say my miles per gallon is 20. And then now I have a 15-gallon tank. Now, when I type it again and press enter, note it executed the same code inside my function, but it used 20 for mpg and 15 for gallons. And then whatever miles was calculated the second time was stored in Odyssey M. Whatever kilometers was calculated as the second time was stored in Odyssey KM. So note, with 2 lines of code, I have 2 easy set of calculations. That's how you call functions, and that's true regardless of whether or not you have a built-in MATLAB function or if you have your own function. So when we use the sine function, what happens is sine only takes in one input. It only returns one output. So technically I should say a equals sine of pi. And note it's not quite 0, it's almost 0. It should be 0, but there's some inherent errors in computers just because they are finite systems. So the sine function has one output, one input. Same thing for most built-in functions that MATLAB has. So for the nth root though, nth root has two inputs. It has whatever the argument is underneath the expression, underneath the root, and then whatever my root should be. So a cubed root, fourth root, etc. So no, there's two pieces. But same format. What am I going to store my output in? What's the name of my function? What code do I want to execute? And what are my inputs going to be? So here, nth root was calculated with 45 and 3 as my inputs.